So this is another, actually Jim spurred me to read this book. It's actually written by a surgeon. It's on, and I've got the resource at the back, it's Better, a Surgeon's Reflection or something like that. And he really is talking about system change throughout this whole book. So it's written by a surgeon, but really systems change as systems change. And some things that he said you really need to have if you're going to have success is diligence is top one. So making sure that you're giving the change enough attention. It's not going to happen in the first month of the school year. A lot of this change will take multiple years to happen, but we need to stick with it and have diligence and work on that. Difficult task for those taking on change that involve risk and consequences. Again, setting high expectations. We're going to get there. Map out where you want to be. This is something that you and your principal or your leaders in your district, maybe you need to sit down and say, by the end of this school year, we'd like to have this implemented. By the end of school year 2, this is what we want to see in place. Because if you look at that whole system of SRBI, it's humongous. And it seems overwhelming, so we're just not going to try it. So break it up for what you think your district, your school, your building can do in a year's time, so that you can celebrate the success of, we did this. Otherwise, you're just not going to get going. So make that list and work on it and have a plan in place. Do right. I thought this was interesting. Working to avoid failings inherent when working with the living and breathing people. We're human. We're going to make mistakes. So we want to try to avoid as many mistakes as possible, and by doing that, we're going to be doing right. So we want to try to anticipate what's going to be a stumbling block. How can we avoid that possible stumbling block? If I have a form for a person ready to go, maybe that's going to avoid them coming to a problem-solving team meeting without the data they need, and they're told they have to go back and collect it. And that's where a teacher really gets annoyed. I collected this, and now you're telling me I have to go back and do more? I've done 6 interventions already. Where's your data? Well, I didn't collect it. Well, we can't do anything until we have the data to show that the student did not respond. So that's something that inherent with working with people, they're going to make mistakes and not do what they need to do. Let's set them up for success by having the appropriate forms, by having the appropriate tools, and giving them the appropriate knowledge up front. So they're ready to do that. Having some ingenuity. Avoiding the ostrich syndrome. As I've said, teachers will stick their head in the sand as long as they possibly can to avoid a change, because if they stick it in there long enough, pendulum's going to go another way. And I don't have to do that change. SRBI, MTSS, RTI, whatever alphabet you want to call it, is not going to go away. Because research is telling us time and time again that doing the interventions, collecting the data, is good for kids. Minnesota's has there's a faction that's really pushing to totally eliminate discrepancy. Part 2. There's pros and cons of that. We all know the research says the discrepancy formula is not good, but it's the best we've got, because there's a lot of districts that aren't ready to do eligibility through MTSS, RTI. So if we get rid of it, we could have a bigger problem on our hands. So we want to make sure that we're working on that. So reflection on failure, we don't want to do that. If it's a failure, we don't want to use that word. But you're searching for new solutions. This intervention didn't work. This data didn't indicate what you were doing with those sight words because you weren't measuring what you were intervening on. It's not a failure. It's just something that we need to go back and reflect and see how could we have done that differently. From that point on, she knew that she didn't collect that type of data. You want to make sure you're using those partnership principles. He goes through each of those in the book a lot, and I'm going to do a very short snapshot on them. They are equality, choice, voice, dialogue, reflection, praxis, and reciprocity. And then to do and go through some of these, page 93 of your book has some good questions that you can ask as you're starting to do some coaching. He's got a lot of resources in there for you. So equality, this is a really critical element, that you are equal to the person that you are coaching with. You may be coaching a principal. At that point, you are equal with him or her. So you're really thinking of that equality. That equality has to be established through your behaviors and your dialogue. And sometimes you need to remind someone, I'm not your administrator. What we say here stays here. Anything that happens does not go in your permanent file. The observations that I might do are not your formal observations that are going into your evaluative file. They're formative evaluations, because we're going to think about it as a learning process. Some teachers need to hear that very clearly from you. So it takes that fear out of, well, she's going to go and tell the principal. You may communicate with the principal, but it's not anything that can be used against. Take the fifth. Can't be used against you. The teacher's opinions are just as important as yours. You may come in thinking this is what we need to work on, and that's going to put the wall up right away. The teacher may have one perception of what needs to be worked on. You may have another. You have to come to a common understanding of what's going to be the best. And sometimes it's not what you wanted to. So make sure you don't come in with an agenda when you're working with those teachers. Both viewpoints are worth hearing. Choice. Both of you have to have choice in your plan development. And I'm always talking about a one-on-one. You may be coaching a whole grade level or so on, but whatever plan, whatever development you're going to do on making these changes, making these system changes, everyone has to agree that that's the way it's supposed to be. So there is that choice. You may prompt the person with some guiding questions to think of it differently, think about it something else that might have more impact on change, but everybody has to have some choice. This is where your listening really comes into play, like Terry was saying. Listen not only with your ears, but listen with your eyes. If you mention something and the teacher kind of does this or starts shuffling the papers, you know that that's something she's a little anxious about, or he. So listen very carefully to what they're saying, not just with their words. And you really have to choose to work together. It seems very obvious. But you have to make that conscious choice that you and this person or this small group are going to work together. And it's an agreed upon thing. That's how systems change. It's difficult to live in others' answers regardless of the amount of goodwill with which it is offered. How often does that happen in education? That we are living someone else's answers? A lot. And that's why people are hesitant. That's why people are frustrated. But remember, Jim says that teachers don't resist change, they just resist poorly planned and poorly thought out change. So giving them that voice, giving them the answers as to why. So you have to have that voice. Everybody has to feel free to express their opinions. This is that safety net of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So they can spout out and share their frustrations, and you have to keep that within you. There's that trust factor of that. You have to listen empathetically, provide teachers with a point of view other than the principal's. Sometimes the principal's philosophy and the teacher's philosophy are very different. Sometimes you can be the mediator between those two. Well, he says I have to do this. Well, let's talk about why he might say that. This is what I see. How can we work by, you have to follow what your principal says you need to do, but how can we do that as well as do some things that we know we need to do? We can't coach teachers and psychs to go against their principal, but we can coach them to follow what they're told, what the edict is, as well as follow some of the new rules and regulations. Does that make sense? Teachers need to know that you're not the snitch. I talked about that. What is said in coaching stays there. The only time that what is said in coaching and you would need to report it to the principal is if it's a safety concern for the student or an abusive situation, those types of things. I've never had that happen. Hopefully we'll never have that happen, but you may see something that you really do need to report. But otherwise, what happens in that coaching session is very private. Do you know, now Rochester people, you're going to be meeting with your other coaches. Are you going to meet with administrators on a regular basis too?
I think we have bi-monthly meetings set up for most of the year, and I think part of that meeting will be meeting with some of the special ed supervisors. So for part of the meeting will be with the general ed instructional coaches, and we'll do like a book study and things, and then the other part is just special ed, and there'll be a supervisor or two there.
Okay. How about you guys? Do you have to meet with administrators at all?
I don't know. We call meetings with the elementary principal, but she's actually the only one we regularly meet.
Okay. And the reason I'm asking is if you have those regular meetings, what are they expecting you to report? How are they expecting you to justify your position and your coaching time?
We're not even technically coaches, so they're kind of athletes.
Yeah. So sometimes they want to have some justification for your time.
And I think that's a little bit different because it goes back to what we talked about earlier. It sounds like some of you in Rochester, that's your position, to be that instructional coach, whereas many of us, it's an add-on. It's something you fit in where you can fit it in.
And for us,
so it's not as formalized.
And sometimes an administrator will ask you to work with someone specifically because of concerns that maybe came up with an observation. If administrators can be coached to make that as a positive rather than as a negative, that, you know, I saw in this observation, if they're talking to a teacher, I saw in this observation that you're really having some struggles with some behavior management. You have a couple options, because I'm going to come and, you know, see how things doing in another couple months. One of your options is to research some behavior management strategies and implement some of those things. Another option might be to meet with so-and-so because she has some strategies that she might do. So it can be more of a choice rather than you are really a bad teacher, you need to meet with this coach. So make it as a choice type thing. So coach your principals in using that kind of language, especially for those that are going to be formal coaches on that. Making sure that you listen more than you tell. Again, not modeling that very well because all you're doing is listening to me right now. See, you're practicing those listening skills. Conversations should be encouraged, and those conversations are then going to encourage more conversations. So if they positive and there's some results of that, you want to make sure that you are encouraging those. A true partnership and relationship must involve dialogue. It's important not to manipulate the conversation. If you come in with an assumption and all you're trying to do is defend your assumption, you're not going to get very far. I really have to work on this. This is something because I am so passionate about doing a really good MTSS, RETI, SRBI, whatever letters you want to use, model, that sometimes I go in and I don't always listen. So I really have to think and stop and make sure that I'm not just defending mine and listening to what the teacher is telling me. Because sometimes it's like, you know, you're right. This is difficult in this area. How can we work through that? But if I continue to say, well, you can do it. You know, this is what you do, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do, we don't get anywhere. The wall just gets built a little bit more. And dialogue is not a win-lose, it's a win-win. So you're going to learn something from listening to that teacher that you can help use then to work with another teacher, and then that teacher's also going to learn something from you.